All right. Can we please start the lunch and session? This is a working session hosted by Intent, the Hoffman Center, and from the Graduate Institute, to which we are very grateful for this possibility. And as you have all as you all know, because you are here, we have a very, very ambitious topic. And when I first thought what could be topics for Davos for this year, this was in September, and the issue of trust already seemed like one that might be quite important. Well, little did I know that trust is now all over. You know, the program in Davos. Sorry, what do you say?
Trust is dead.
Trust is, well, so this is a leader of a multilateral institution, which is not dead, but it's a combination of people that we have in this room and with whom we want to think about why trust should not be dead, why trust matters, and where to find kernels of trust across the different sectors and areas to make a reconstruction and a rebuilding of trust possible. But let me start because we are an academic institution and because you see also on your table some, you have a little booklet from CEPR, which is an academic network. And as academics, we work on trust. We have people who work on trust, and what they have found already many years ago is that trust is a very important glue in the society, that it enables low-cost transactions, that it empowers market transactions, and that therefore it is ultimately also a recipe and an engine for growth and prosperity. Putnam famously, back in the 90s, already identified high and low trust societies. And one of the features of high trust societies is not only that they are more efficient, but that people actually like living in them. It also makes you happier if you know that you live in a society in which you can trust institutions, rules, and yes, also people you don't know, strangers on the street, whom you can ask for help, or even more extremely, who come to ask whether they can help you if they see you somewhere lost. Well, these days with Google Maps, it's not so important anymore, but you know, in the past, directions were one way how you could help people that you didn't know. But of course, beyond this function of trust as an economic glue, it is also absolutely crucial for our international order and for the building of this international order, because many of what we have called the rules-based system depends on a level of trust among sovereigns, and who come together and agree to behave in ways that may not always be optimal in the short run for them, but they recognize as being optimal in the outcomes. And that is why the rules-based order also depends on trust. And as we know, I don't think I have to belabor that too much. Right now, trust is broken on many levels. So we will have here conversations and initial sort of fire starters, they call them in Davos, from a number of voices. On the one hand side, we have Severin Schwan, the chairman of Roche, who will be giving a perspective from business. Then we have Sergei Guriev, the dean of the London Business School and an eminent scholar of polarization and populism. And we have Sebastian Malaby, this I have to look up, is the Paul Volcker, senior fellow of the Council of Foreign Relations. Did I get that right? Yeah. And he can give us a perspective He doesn't live in the US, but he cannot give us a perspective from the US foreign relations point of view. We are missing Martin Sandbu, who did not make it across town after an interview. And we are missing Sandrine Dixon, but she is on her way. We start, and I would like to, and maybe in terms of the tables allocation, some of you have been kind of positioned. Let me also say it's this, the flow is in three parts. We first have these short interventions from the panel here. Then we go into the table conversations, and you have at every table a facilitator. I might present them already now. So we have Marie-Laure Salle, the director of the Graduate Institute, and therefore the boss of several of us here in our room. We have Naoko Ishii, professor at Tokyo University and former CEO of the GEF, the Global Environmental Facility. So her table can talk will talk about international institutions and the multilateral system. We have here the governments table, and it is led by Sergei, in fact, yes. And we have the academia table led by Dominic Rohner, a colleague from the Graduate Institute and co-director of the Hoffman Center, and a scholar of peace. And finally, we have, last but not least, the Gilles Carbonnier, who is leading the table on, when are you going to come here? No, civil society, but I thought I also wanted you here in front. Yes. Yeah. This is the vice president of the ICRC, so the International Committee of the Red Cross. So he can also talk about, international institutions and their current experience. All right, so we are nice.
Gilles is on the list.
Gilles is on the list. Yeah, no. I know. Okay, so we have here a nice, crowded, wonderful panel, fantastic. Thank you so much, all of you, for agreeing to come here in this busy Davos, where there is, I think, probably in parallel right now, or maybe still ongoing, also a peace board that is being discussed, still ongoing, yes, with a lot of people and so on, yes. So you made the right choice. Thank you for being here. Severin, can I start with you, please?
Yeah, my name is Severin Schwan. I'm the chairman of the Roche Group. Roche is active in medicines and diagnostics, and we need a lot of trust of many stakeholders to pursue our activities and fulfill our mission. And I'd just like to give you two examples. We need patients who trust on the potential value of a new medicine and who trust that they are safe. And we need this trust even before the regulatory authorities have approved the medicine for commercial use, namely in clinical trials. Can you imagine, right? Another example is more related to our business model. Our business model basically is a contract with society where we take the risks to innovate, where we don't really know whether we will have a positive outcome or not. And in return, society grants us protection in the form of property rights, intellectual property, with patents, so that we can earn back the money which we originally invested and compensate our investors for the risks which we take. Now, if I look around specifically on those two topics, the trust in science and in medicine, on the one hand, and the trust in capitalism, really, where the underlying element is property, right? Has always been a discussion, and it's not new topics, right? I wouldn't pretend that it was all kind of extremely trustful in the past, and now more recently it's eroding. I think that have always been topics. But having said that, I am worried that we are losing trust here. I mean, you have all followed the discussions about vaccination, for example. Now, I mean, scientists, including scientists I know and scientists which are working for our organization, they would say that vaccines, in spite of potential side effects, overall are very valuable for mankind. And still, there are people who don't trust vaccines, and they would refuse to be vaccinated. And even in my broader family, in my own broader family, there are family members who would refuse to get vaccinated. They would simply refuse to get vaccinated because they don't trust that this stuff is safe, and they don't think that the benefits are sufficient. This is worrying, in particular if you think that often with healthcare, it's not only about yourself, right? You can argue, well, anybody can do whatever they want. The negative costs, right, they spill over to the rest of the society. This can be medical costs, I mean, with infectious diseases, for example. But if you think of cancer, where you could do screening and things like that, you give a lot of burden to the society if the society then eventually has to pay if you get ill, right? So I'm worried about that. On capitalism and property rights, equally, there have always been, but there are, I'd say, even more voices today who say, well, we don't trust these companies. This contract is one-sided, right? We don't get enough value for it. And you find people who take it all the way and they say, well, actually, we should abolish property, in particular in the field of healthcare. This should be managed by governments. This should be managed by the public. We should nationalize that kind of business, because that would be more beneficial for society. Now, as you can imagine, from somebody who represents a private company in the healthcare industry, this is almost an existential question. And personally, I also believe in the value of science and medicine. I also believe on the positive side of capitalism, and that it has been an enormous drive for innovation. And I think medicines and healthcare in general wouldn't be what it is today without the positive forces of capitalism. So then you wonder, well, where does it come from? What can we do about it? And I don't have the answer, but perhaps 2 or 3 thoughts. First of all, we have to be very self-reflective and self-critical. If we talk about science, now the reality is that science is not perfect, and we know that in the scientific system, and this is both the case in industry, equally the case in academia, because I know there are a lot of people here in academia, that science is, a lot about how you frame questions and answers. There is typically not a yes and a no, and that gives you flexibility, right? There is clearly, and I've seen it over and over again, a tendency to go for quantity instead of quality, right? I mean, there's an incentive where scientists are incentivized because they write a lot of papers, not necessarily the really important papers. So there is an incentive issue here. And sometimes you even have integrity issues, right? Because scientists get under so much pressure. In particular, emerging scientists who are at the beginning of their career, they want to develop. And then they either kind of get biased, they frame the question in a way, or they forget about certain information to make their paper more flashy, to outright fraud, right? Where they just falsify data. So I think we have to be self-critical, right? Because whenever you have these manipulators around who attack trust, often there is also some truth behind it, and we have to be self-critical to look at it and get rid. Capitalism the same, right? I mean, the reality is that even though I'm a strong proponent and defender of it, it is true that a lot of companies are very short-term oriented, right, and not long-term oriented. This is a reality, and that can lead to distortions of what is good for society, what is good for the company. And a lot of companies use the flexibility to dump external cost on society whilst cashing in the profit, right? Because the regulatory system allows for that. And in the extreme case, you also have fraud and non-compliance, etc. So I think the first thing to rebuild trust is that you look, into your own court and say what is going wrong and what do we have to improve. The second point, and then I close, is on the communication side. And here I'm struggling, I have to say. I'm from a personal experience. I've been many years CEO. I'm now chair. And perhaps it's a generational thing. Perhaps I'm simply getting too old. But I do believe at the end of the day, trust has a lot to do with transparency, with talking with each other, explaining each other's position. We are often, as business leaders, we are often criticized of not showing up enough in the public domain, right? Defending our case. And I have to say, with social media, you have to really weigh the pros and cons in a very careful way, because you can easily end up with a shitstorm. You can easily end up with reputational consequences for your organization. There are CEOs out there who literally say, I'm not taking the personal risk for myself and for my family, especially if they have young children. They don't want to see their picture on the front page of a newspaper. And I don't have an answer for that. I'm just saying this is something which makes it more complex, and perhaps the next generation is more able to deal with this problem than I am. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Severin. And thank you also for raising this point about communication and what is the possibilities and responsibilities of business to speak up. Just quite, I don't know, some of you may have seen this discussion with Jamie Dimon and Zanny Beddoes yesterday, where she was pushing him on the point, why are so many CEOs quiet right now, especially in the US, of course. And I think that might be also something that this table might want to discuss. So I have on my program next Sergey. Do you want to go next, please?
You leave me no choice. Thank you. Thank you very much, Beatrice, for inviting me. As Beatrice mentioned, among other things, I'm a scholar of populism, and together with CPR, which Beatrice leads, we had a research and policy network on populism, bringing together all the scholars from across Europe working on, and the world working on those issues. And of course, sorry? Yeah. And of course, the issue of trust in the system is synonymous to the rise of populism. Today, we think about populism as a movement which attacks elites, which believes that the system is corrupt and wants to replace the system where educated, sophisticated, detached elites should be replaced by pure people. And this links back to what Severin was talking about anti-science, anti-expert movement. Now, I would say three things. First, I'll give you a general picture on trust in each other and trust in the system. And second, I'll give you a couple of factors which explain what happened in recent decades. Now, the general picture is trust may mean different things. Beatrice was talking about trust in others, other individuals, and most importantly, strangers, people you don't know. There is a lot of trust in close circles, to relatives, to families, to neighbors. But what really matters for economic growth that Beatrice was talking about is trust which we call generalized social trust. Trust to people you don't know. And countries where you have higher level of trust are more prosperous, richer, but also delivering higher well-being to their citizens. And there is quantitative research on this. And about 15 years ago, my colleagues from Sciences Po, Jan Algan and Pierre Caillouc, published a very influential paper on this, showing a causal effect from trust to economic growth. Now, the other issue of trust is trust in the system, trust in government, trust in institutions, trust in rule of law. On this continent, also trust in European institutions, trust in church, trust in local government. And these things are different. So generalized social trust, trust in each other, has been stable. It's very different across the world. Nordic countries, this country, have very high level of interpersonal trust. Some other countries have low level of interpersonal trust. And as I said, it matters for prosperity and well-being. But it's been stable over the last few decades, since it got started to be measured in a systematic way in the 1990s, in particular in the World Values Survey. But trust in the system has been declining. And it's been declining unevenly. In the US, much of the shock was the first decade of the century, when a lot of workers lost their jobs because of globalization, substitution by imports from low-wage countries, and were left behind. The government did not, neither the Republican nor Democratic government did not invest in supporting workers who lost their jobs, as it would be done in those Nordic countries in particular. In Europe, in general, the big shock to institutional trust was during Great Recession, when people who saw that suddenly the system is shocked due to mismanagement of the financial system, failures of regulators, they also started to question the very system, and that resulted in the growth of populism. And indeed, there is quantitative research, including my own, that shows this shift. And those shifts continued, and indeed, that eventually results in lack of respect and trust, not just in politicians, but also in all kinds of experts, in academics. And part of that is because what Severin was talking about, and again, there is research on this, and I do research on this myself, is we have a different information environment now. We have social media, the rise in social media, the rise of mobile broadband, internet. It's a reasonably recent phenomenon. In 2006, US had no 3G internet, right? When we think about global population, only 4% of global population got access to mobile broadband in 2007, 2008. Today, it's mostly, the whole world has internet on mobile devices. And of course, the first and foremost important implication of that is the rise of social media. And there is a lot of research which shows that social media disproportionately disseminates negative information. This is just an implication of advertising-based business model, where I need your attention. I need you to be addicted to the app. And the way I do it, my algorithm actually disseminates negative, outrageous stuff, and often actually misleading or false stuff. So you become more critical of the system because of this informational environment. And again, there is causal effect from the rise of mobile broadband, internet, and social media on general negativity towards the system. There is a positive moment there, which is when populists do come to power. And as our colleagues show, it's actually bad for the economy, bad for institutions. But when they do get to power, they become incumbents. And also social media starts working against them. So if you have your favorite populist politician in office whom you dislike, you should remember that social media is now working against that person. So just a grain of optimism. Now, if the other point I would just make, which is again a very important point, explaining why we are losing trust in the system, is the paradox of democratic leader. So this is what political scientists talk a lot about. The world is complex, and of course on social media we see how complex it is. Wars, fragmentation, tariffs, climate crisis, nature crisis, the technological disruption. We want our leaders to be competent, highly educated, experienced, knowing what they're doing. At the same time, of course, we want our leaders to be close to us. We want them to represent us. How can you face this trade-off when leaders should be highly qualified on one hand, and the other hand, close to the average voter. And this trade-off, this paradox creates a gap where populists enter, saying you should not trust the elites because they are detached, they don't represent you. I'll just give you a statistic about the United States. 40% of American voters have college degree, which of course is a critical factor of success in the US, in the US society. How many Congress people do? 96%. So an average American, a median voter in the United States feels that they are not represented in the decision-making environment. And that, of course, creates a gap which opens an opportunity for populists. I'll stop here because we have very little time. So just 3 things, big picture on what's happening, the role of the social media, and the paradox of democratic leader.
Thank you very much, Sergey. And so you are one of the people who very early already started pointing out the role of social media, which of course now Davos is all about AI, and how that interacts with, negatively in this case, with democratic institutions. Sebastian, your perspective, please.
Okay, so I'm Sebastian Malaby. As Bea said, I don't sound American, but I actually do have an American passport. My work at the Council on Foreign Relations in New York for the last 15 years has been basically about America, for America, and so I'm sort of intellectually living there, even if I'm not physically always there. One story that comes back to me, which is relevant to this discussion, I think, which kind of picks up a bit on what Severin said, is, I was talking to one of Trump's very close private sector advisors in 2017, right at the start of the first Trump term, and he was advocating for all kinds of tariffs and so forth. And I said to him, after he was giving his talk, I went up and we chatted, and I said, look, it's one thing when you're a property magnate and you are doing deals in New York to play chicken, bluff, threaten, etc., because the whole negotiation in a real estate deal in New York is anchored by the rule of law. There is that foundation of trust. So you can play games on top of that, but basically you're in a safe space because of the rule of law. International law doesn't function like that. So when you're doing international relations, you need to be a whole lot more careful about blowing up norms, because that's what you got, right? And his answer was, and I think this is revealing and we should reflect on it, his answer was, yes, that's true, but if you think the status quo is so deeply dysfunctional, then it's worth blowing everything up to try and make something better. And this perception that the status quo is deeply flawed is not one that I share at all analytically, personally, but it is one that animates the Trump administration, and we have to understand that. And so if you want to rebuild trust, part of it is, as Severin was saying, self-reflection and thinking, okay, so what could we do better? And I think for Europe, for some other democracies, Canada and so forth, it does start with spending, more on contributing to collective security, to your own security, to being a more independent player. One thing we know about Trump is that he loves power. He loves people who have got power, who act with power, hence this weird fascination with Putin. And I think, in some ways it's perverse, and you could just write it off as absurd. But at the same time, it is a message to Europe in particular that if you want to be at the table, and this was very much in Mark Carney's speech this week, if you want to be at the table and you want to be taken seriously, you need to take your own responsibilities seriously. So that's one quick point I'd like to make. The other thing is that, of course, we have a governance crisis in classic geopolitics, as evidenced by the craziness around Greenland. But we also have a governance crisis in the other big seismic shift which is going on in the world at the moment, and that is the arrival of generative AI. And it's very striking that after ChatGPT came out at the end of 2022, in 23 and 24, there was some reasonable progress in terms of governance of AI. There were 3 summits in London, Seoul, and then Paris. There were a bunch of national institutes of different countries set up to begin the process of creating kind of oversight mechanisms for cutting-edge language models. Then in 2025, this completely stagnated, basically. It nobody's interested in it. And there's a few reasons. I mean, Trump doesn't like regulation, and that's a big problem. But in addition, you've got the fact that we are in a race dynamic, or many people in the West feel we are in a race dynamic with China. And therefore, there's a sense that if we regulate and slow down, the other side wins, and we're frightened of that. It's a lack of trust, precisely, between the West and China. And so in the absence of trust, you get no regulatory progress. And indeed, I would say that in one of the biggest actions, it's not a regulatory action, but it's sort of a government action. Sorry. It's a governance action with respect to AI. A wrong choice was made. And I just want to describe this wrong choice as an example of the cost of the lack of trust. So when you're looking at AI models, right, there are these proprietary models which are relatively controlled by the creators. And if somebody is abusing them and they're getting access through an API, you just cancel the access. So this is a relatively controlled form of AI diffusion. Then you've got open weight models. People download them into their own systems. They modify them however they like. They take away the guardrails. And if they're abusing it, there ain't nothing you can do, right? It's out there and you can't pull it back. So open weight models are intrinsically more dangerous. Now, there are a couple of ways you could think about limiting open weight models. You could try to clamp down domestically and maybe in coordination with other countries on open weight models and say, we don't want this. In my view, even though that would slow diffusion a bit and raise a bit of costs for model users, that would be very sensible because of the downside risks in the technology. A clamp down on open weight. The alternative would be to say, well, let's not clamp down on our own open weight, but let's just slam China because they're creating open weight. And anyway, anything that China does, we regard as threatening. So we're going to have a semiconductor export ban, and we're going to ban the use of ASML lithography machines, and we're just going to kill these rivals because we don't trust them, so all you can do is smash them in the face. And that's what the US attempted. It was the Biden administration, of course, that tried that, continued by the Trump people, but less so. But it was a Biden policy. It was a very bad choice because guess what? China is too strong to push around. It would have been much better to go to Beijing and say, look, we have a joint problem. Neither of us wants crazy open weight models. We are the new nuclear club. We need a new non-proliferation regime. Let's do something collectively about the dissemination of these dangerous open weight models. Instead of which, that opportunity was blown in favor of a aggressive sort of, rival-driven, non-trust-based attack on Chinese AI systems that failed. So I think the costs of low trust are very evident, but to rebuild it, as I said before, we do need to look at ourselves and figure out what we can do better.
Thank you very much, Sebastian. I should have mentioned, because we gave some literature, that you have also just written a book. Can you say briefly the title, because I don't?
Yes, the book is The Thinking Machine. It's the story of Demis Hassabis, who's knocking around these parts this week. A fantastic window onto the development of AI, and it is out at the end of March. The Thinking Machine.
Thank you.
I'm sorry, no, I got that wrong. The Infinity Machine. The Thinking Machine is the movie. I can't remember.
So good, I asked you.
The Infinity Machine, sorry.
The Infinity Machine. Much better, much better. Excellent. So, thank you. And with this, Sandrine, Honorary President and Global Ambassador of the Club of Rome, Societal Trust, and where do we take it? We are running a bit behind, so
Yes.
I am starting to put a little bit of pressure.
That's okay. It's always the last one that
Not
loses
quite. No,
out.
Gilles is the last one.
Okay, Gilles, you're the one who's going to get really squeezed. Let me build a little bit on this and bring us as a community into the whole conversation around trust. And I've been asked to relate this to societal trust, but also the planetary boundaries science and the work that we've been doing through Earth for All and at the Club of Rome. I mean, we have to remember that the Club of Rome was focused on the human problématique. And I think where we've lost sight of the human problématique as a community as well, hence that has had an impact on trust, is that there's a bit of a myth around trust. in particular the relationship between West and East and North and South. First of all, I do believe, coming from Belgium, having grown up in the United States, that we anchored our trust much more in culture and in like-minded cultures. And we did not build trust with China. We did not build trust with Africa. We did not build trust with Latin America. And when I mention we, I'm probably coming from both the US and from the European side. And that leaves us in a very deep conundrum, because now we're caught with our pants down or our skirts up, as I like to say, which means that because we didn't build that trust and we eroded the trust, whether it be through colonialism or whether it be through the lack of new partnerships or trade deals that were actually profitable for both sides, when we actually relied so heavily on transatlantic trust, we now are finding ourselves in a very difficult dilemma, because we need to build trust from scratch at a time when we need it most. And this is where I think we're all completely destabilized. I'm destabilized as a transatlantic product. The guardrails are all gone. The respect, the diplomacy, the way in which we engaged, the fact that post-World War II, through the Marshall Plan, we built Europe up together as the United States and Europe. And now all of a sudden we're being told by the United States that Europe doesn't matter. So where is it that we can find those anchors of trust? We've heard about AI. And I would go even further in terms of AI. I would call it tech bro feudalism. And I go further because not only is the erosion of trust incredibly grave, but the mechanisms of manipulation beyond disinformation are happening right in front of our eyes. The United States owns 80% of Europe's data. Europe is dependent transactionally, financially, on some of the top banks in the United States and card companies. And lastly, we've just seen our regulatory framework on reporting decimated by 10 of the top American companies, including the Koch brothers. So as much as we bang our heads on each other around where did that trust erosion happen, we have to remember right now that it is systematically being eroded on purpose. And one of the things we cannot afford to do is to fall into that trap. That means we have to think about where can we then redevelop that trust? Where are those anchors? Where are those core anchors? One is at the community level. Most communities trust their pharmacist more than they trust their government. How can we open up dialogue to rebuild that trust? In the community, planetary boundaries and prosperity community that I work in, people are suffering. And the other side, the denialists, have continuously said that we're not offering an alternative positive future, but we're going to make people suffer more. So where I disagree with regard to the data is right now we need to anchor everything we do in proof points. And yes, it can't be too long and it can't be long papers, but we need to go back to making sure that we can prove to people that actually what the populists are saying is not that they're going to make their lives better, but they're going to make their lives worse. And that we do have systematically amongst us answers to a new type of alternative future that will build their lives so that they can thrive, not just survive. And so my last point is, on Monday, we also launched W Social, which is the new European trust-based digital platform that will guarantee that bots will not be used and that will guarantee trusted conversations amongst people. And I think that is one way to hack back that level of trust as we move forward. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sandrine. And yes, your last but not least, Gilles, perspective from International Geneva.
Well, thank you, Beatrice, for the trust of inviting me to share a few humanitarian perspective on the key question of trust. And trust me to try to say three points in 4 minutes. Look, I will speak as indeed not as a professor of the Graduate Institute, but as the vice president of the ICRC. And the first point is being here for the week, I feel we have to go against a self-fulfilling prophecy that the force of the law is inevitably being replaced by the law of the force. This cannot be the case. And of course, my organization is the guardian of the Geneva Conventions of international humanitarian law. And we have seen an erosion of respect for international humanitarian law, which has to be stopped and reversed in the interest, and I mean also in the economic and security interest of everyone, large and big powers and small powers alike. And this is why we have launched a global initiative on IHL. And we see that by launching this initiative with 6 initial states from all different regions, Brazil, China, France, Jordan, Kazakhstan, and South Africa, we have now over 140 states participating in the conversations to make respect for international humanitarian law a political priority. And I think it's very encouraging to see a rally around. And frankly speaking, if torture becomes commonplace and is accepted, if killing civilians and children in armed conflict is widely accepted, and if the use of weapons that shouldn't be used because they don't discriminate is accepted, I think we will all be haunted, and this will haunt us back at our doorstep. So the first is there is a way to restore basic trust in the rule of law if we collectively work across divides. And I think it's the basis of social capital as well, which is so important in the economy, by having some rules of the game that are accepted. My second point is that we have been working for 160 years across frontline between people who kill each other for survival purposes. Or that's at least how they see things, and they see the enemy as a threat to their own survival. The only way we can operate without armed escorts and without being ourselves armed is by being at least tolerated by all the parties, and for that you need trust. And this trust is based on consistency, knowing exactly that we are there just for humanitarian purposes and no other purpose. And then we have fundamental principles of impartiality, neutrality, and independence that we have to embody in our DNA. And it's only by being consistent and avoiding all these, double standards that over time we maintain that minimal trust so that we are at least tolerated to maintain that space. And my last point is that as warfare is ever more digitalized, and we see that we are really moving very fast to also a digital turn of attacks on civilian infrastructure and vital infrastructure, we need to preserve trust in the digital space as well. And this is quite challenging because some people and some parties to armed conflict, they see the mere fact of our digital infrastructure and digital fact that we have phones with us, etc., as a medium of surveillance, which is embedded within one block or the other, and that might be seen as hostile. So there we are working with states, we are working with tech companies, we are working with civil society organizations on various projects. One is to establish this digital emblem that is recognized by everyone and that indicate that hospitals, humanitarian ventures must be protected from cyber attacks in the cyberspace. We are also working with states to avert using AI solutions in weapons and in surveillance models that increase the incentive for outright violence and reduce the risk of fundamental principle of humanity embedded in IHL being violated. So much to do. I think what is rejoicing is that we see rally around of across sectors for those fundamental ideas, but it's really we are at a turning point, and the challenges are so big that I think, like you mentioned, Sandrine, for the nature sector, there is no time to lose, but there is no option but to carve out this space and maintain trust.
Thank you very much, Gilles. So now, an applause for our panel, please. They've definitely given us a lot of food for thought, a lot of analysis, the difference between societal trust and systemic trust, or trust in systems. The question, at least I heard from you also that question somewhere that I've raised this week as the Marconi question. Do we have believed in the power of our values? Do we have to recognize more the value of power, and what does that mean? Can that also be a necessary condition for trust among equally large-sized entities? Well, trust normally we have been thinking about as an equalizer, right? Small and large countries. And so this is definitely something for this table. The European Union has been mentioned several times, the table here on governments that should be discussed. And so we are now going into our second phase, in which hopefully we will not only discuss the reasons for the difficulties and the broken trust, but also possible kernels of solutions. This, in Davos, typically we don't see so many numbers. It's more a place for words. And moreover, it is about stories. So personal stories or stories of experiences are very often what sort of has a lot of power and sticks with people. So you are very welcome to tell stories of actions that you have seen, experienced, or would like to see, that can be sort of translated into things that people can take away more easily across the different tables. And I think I have already presented them. So without further ado, let's move into the discussion. And we have now 25 minutes for this. Please. Thank you again.
How do they get food? Hello.
Sorry?
The food is coming. I asked that we all get fed. Hi.
This is what leadership is.
How's it going? I feel you more energized than last year.
The good one is I also need to moderate the discussion.
Yeah, maybe because I'm spending time with the right people, and I'm also just doing what I need to do, raising the alarm for the system.
What is the correlation survey, we asked this question. Do you think your children will be better off? If you don't believe in the future, why put value to trust?
So there is it's very hard to distinguish the two things. Believe in the future, like you're formulated, and the question whether you believe in the system. And these things are very correlated, and I've not seen studies which can identify the causal effect on one or the other.
The US now, 90% say that.
It's a mistake.
Yeah, they say that their children will have it worse. I understand the question is trust of the success factor, right?
And part of that is objective. It's not a misperception. But what I wanted to say was a lot of negativity is actually misperceptions. And I fully agree with Sebastian. Well, AI is going to kill us all. But the world is not as bad as people think. So I have questions. How can governments rebuild trust domestically and internationally? What policy choices help restore credibility, long-term commitments, and what strategy should Europe adopt in the hostile environment? So, and Beatrice says we need to give stories. Thank you.
I just come and seen the long bit closed down and then during that all of the meetings can I
I see that the discussion is still very much ongoing on all tables, and I heard that wonderful discussions. We still have the room after 2 o'clock. So for those of you who don't need to run, you can continue some of the conversations. But now I'd like to call on our discussion leaders to tell us what they took away and whether maybe they have a solution. I'll start with you. Let's start with you, Marie-Laure. Yes.
Maybe I'll stand up. Yeah, maybe the mic will be helpful. Yeah, so that everybody can hear me. Okay, so first I want to thank the participants to that table, because it was a rich discussion. We could have gone on for, I think, 1 hour, 2 hours, 2 days. So unfortunately, we didn't really cover all the questions that we had put on the table. The first question I put on the table was, what kind of trust does business need? And I had specified, think about short versus long term. I'll try to make, some short summary of what was a very dense discussion. So I think that there was a, nearly unanimous conviction that we had to think about this question in concentric circles first. That was the idea. And spontaneously, people started with the circles that are closer to business. So clients, shareholders, employees were obviously the 3 elements that we focused on. And there was a lot of similarity in the way to approach trust at that level. First was this notion of client/employee/shareholder centricity, which I think came around quite a bit. But there was also an acknowledgement, obviously, that there might be sometimes conflicts of interest, because the shareholder centricity might not align with the client centricity or the employee centricity. And so the other point that was really underscored by a lot of people was, instead of pushing those conflicts of interest or those conflicts to court under the rug, the importance of actually creating space to discuss them in different places of the organization. So don't hide them, but actually have fair and clear discussion of why sometimes some might go over the others. So create this culture of authenticity and reliability through this transparency, openness, and acknowledgement that the trends might be different in at different moments and contexts. And then we moved on to, there may be a kind of a bemol here, which I think is an important one, was the question of whether or not the form of ownership might have an impact on the capacity for companies to do that better, or less well. And so thinking about, which forms of ownership are actually allowing for more, authentic trust in the long term was also a question. Then we moved on to the affirmation that beyond this kind of proximate circles and concentric circles, actually today companies and business in general need other forms of trust. They need first trust in information and science and expertise. So in that they align with government and with other actors maybe in society that really want to see work on that. So this is one very important level. And another important level was actually acknowledgement, but that particularly multinational firms, but probably also actually all firms that are involved in global supply chains, so they might not necessarily be themselves corporate multinationals, but they also need some form of trust in common rules at the global level. And that in that level, the speech by Mark Carney was mentioned with this idea that, we need to reconstruct with the willings, in a sense, a form of global order and common rules that we can work with, and that this is actually a place and a role for business too. I mean, business should be involved in that level. I'll move on to the second question, which was, what is driving the current corporate silence on trust, rules, and values? Obviously, with a particular, thinking about the US. And I added, and a surprisingly rapid realignment with the opposite of trust, which is force. So, and what are the risks of that? So here we had a number of very interesting comments. The first interesting set of comments actually was that, okay, one very simple and easy explanation is the market constraints in many different ways. So, I mean, speaking out might have very direct consequences, retaliatory consequences on your business, whatever is this speaking out, wherever you go. So that's an obvious one. A kind of variant of that was the personal impact and retaliation. If you yourself put your head out, and this was actually, Séverine, also what you were saying in your own speech a bit earlier about the communication dimension and how do you handle this, particularly in these times of social media, etc. So this notion that, yes, there's a degree of fear, quote unquote, both personal one, but also for the business, for the company, that is one of the explanation. And particularly in the context of the US, where you have a very vindicative, head of state and very vindicative, team at the head of the American government today. People who don't forget whatever it is that you would be saying or doing, etc. So those would generate too many costs. A very interesting caveat or counterpoint was made, which is that the fact that there's a silence, kind of an official silence, doesn't mean that nothing is happening, and that there might be actually ways that are background ways of working to say things in different ways, in different channels, that actually, would have an impact. And then we engage in a discussion on the importance of recognizing that, but also maybe the importance on finding ways to communicate that with the employees, with kind of more proximate shareholders and stakeholders, because we also recognize that this gap between official communication and certain sets of issues might generate inside those closer concentric circles distrust towards corporate leaders. And so finding ways to say, yes, we are not coming out on those issues. Nestle was mentioned on a more kind of recent case. We're not coming out on those issues, but we are addressing them, and this is how we address them, was a very important point that was made. A very important element of the discussion was also that, I'm trying to hurry, that it might be, also a recognition that it's not only a few leaders that are kind of imposing this kind of fear on the corporate world, but that actually it's a broader sociological trend, particularly in the US, but more globally now, the MAGA trend writ large, writ global, that really is changing rules of the games for companies, and that companies have to take that into account. First mover disadvantage, I think that was a very important point in the sense that maybe everybody's waiting for the other to start, and then once it starts, it works, it helps. And a kind of also cultural explanation of do we talk out, do we say or not, and this really, was an important element. Finally, a few words on the last question. Unfortunately, we didn't have too much time to deal with, which was what can business do to rebuild trust? It was very strongly affirmed that business definitely has a role to play, including at the level of the global order, global multilateral order, for the reasons that I mentioned before, of the fact that business needs to have some form of predictability in that context, of the fact that actually multinational corporations are working in global supply chains and they need to have some reliability here. I guess maybe the last point is an interesting one to discuss further, I think, which was the notion of bringing that at the level of the individual leaders, which is kind of work on this degree of self-confidence, which shouldn't be the arrogance. So there's a fine line there, but some degree of self-confidence which implies constant questioning of what we are doing. And so working at that level might be a way for business also to contribute to the rebuilding of trust. And this was also mentioned by you, Severin, in your talk when you were saying we need to question ourselves. First, we need to start there. Sorry.
Great. Thank you so much, Marie-Laure, and a very productive table here. I thought I would very, very briefly share a story that I learned this morning, and which kind of relates to this question of fear and why not speak up, and what are mechanisms to overcome that. And this comes from a young head of state. There was a round table of young heads of states, and one was talking about the fact that he is now running a country which used to be run by a kind of mafia. And he said that, of course, everybody is afraid. They're afraid so to speak up. And so one of the things that he did is to say, I have a long, long bench of people. Not everybody, not always the same one is going to the press conference and sticking his head out, because then they will be targeted. Instead, I have 30. And every time somebody else is speaking up, and they know that there are 30 more behind. So I thought that was one of those stories which is very beautiful, because it is actually, it comes from a very deep fear for one's own life, overcome with collective action. If many stick their head up, one after the other, that may be also a solution. So now can I move to governments? Sergei, that's you. Yeah.
Thank you very much. Marie-Laure had a first mover advantage, so she covered pretty much everything we wanted to talk about. But we did talk about self-reflection that Severin asked the world for, and we said that trust is not coming from not making mistakes. Trust is coming from accountability for the mistakes. And we talked about how leaders, government or corporate leaders, need to be able or need to be forced to admit, apologize, and repair. And we talk about specific examples and stories. One of those was inconsistent approach to regulation of sustainability disclosure in various parts of the world, where governments impose requirements which initially are excessive, then they roll back, and that creates lack of trust in the governments. It is also coming from lack of trust between government, society, and business, because governments and societies tell businesses, look, we don't trust you, you need to disclose more. And this balance eventually is to be found through dialogue between NGOs, corporates, governments, trusting each other, because otherwise you get into excessive regulation, which then will have to be rolled back because of a backlash that we are observing around the world today. We also talked about how political system is often short-termist, and that creates inability to invest in the real long-term solutions, which then, of course, undermines trust for the into the system. And we talked about dialogue and information. How to build trust, you need to bring people together. We talked about how you can do it physically, bringing people from countries, cultures that don't like each other, sometimes don't recognize each other's right to exist. And then through dialogue, through conversation, you can actually build a human connection and trust. This is something I should say is very, very personal to me. London Business School is the school where 90% of students, 90% of faculty are international. And we bring people from countries which are at war, and they still study together, learn how to work together. And this is fundamental driver of why people come to work in our organization, because we see how we contribute to building international trust and global peace. And we also talked about fragmented information environment, which is, we want to have accountability, but if everybody has your own set of beliefs, and not just beliefs, but also facts, it's very hard to hold leaders accountable if you live in a different version of reality. And so the only solution, but we are not very optimistic, but the only solution is more regulation of social media. Sometimes, again, that can go too far. But at this stage, I think we all agree that it's not sufficient yet. And interestingly, while being pessimistic, we also mentioned some successes. There are some successes in Europe on regulating social media, but also around the world, fixing access to social media for school kids. And this is actually very useful because it's been proven that in addition to propagating misinformation and negative information, social media is also a mental health problem for teenagers. So this is what we covered. I was very short because Marie-Laure covered everything we wanted to talk about. Thank you.
Great, thank you very much, Sergey. Let me move over to Naoko. The multilateral system, you have a small task.
Well, really, thank you for my table. A really lively discussion. I learned a lot. My surprise is that there is quite a deep hope, trust in multilateralism in this world. I was thinking that maybe more like collapsing the trust, but everybody in this table, in a different degree, but wanted to actually value of multilateralism. At the same time, we have seen the several success cases and several failure cases. But fundamentally, as a solution to this learning from success case and the failure case, the important way going forward is to create a coalitions. Important is it has to be plural. Coalitions of the willing according to the purpose and then who you want to be there, so that to maybe purpose by purpose and group by group, we should be able to create these coalitions of the willing. But the important thing is that we be very clear that what exactly those coalitions will do, for whom, and those the purpose should not be in contradiction of the global kind of broad-based trust, the mission of multilateral institutions. Important point, one point is that are we discussing this to save the multilateral institutions, or we are really discussing to save the mission of the institutions? I think this is a very important distinction or two, between two. And then, let's see, one value of this multilateralism, the space is that we need a trust to create a space, that a safe space, that so that we can really table then maybe the different opinions for solutions, and in addition to the concrete mission, concrete goal for multilateral institutions to keep this kind of dialogue space, safe space for town hall, you said. Town hall is one of the most important role of the multilateralism. So let me stop here.
Dominic, academia, what can academia contribute, and why is academia also so silent?
Okay, thanks a lot. Well, we'll be not silent for 4 minutes at least. So yeah, let me put a timer. Exactly. Here we go. Yeah, no, so trust, Sergey was already hinting at it. Trust has measurable effects, right, on GDP. So think of the work of Jonathan Temple and others, and also on peace. So I'll promise to my dear colleagues at the table to say a few words on that as well, given that I have written a book on it called The Peace Formula. And so basically trust is a key ingredient for peace. And we've shown that with plenty of statistical studies where war depletes trust, and then lack of trust will be the unfortunately, the stage for the new war. So it's a classical vicious cycle. And in political science, for example, they call that the security dilemma, where we both think of the Soviet Union and the US in Cold War. None of them wanted to have nuclear Armageddon, but they were kind of afraid that the other one would pull the trigger first. Think of the Cuba Missile Crisis, for example. And so, yeah, building trust is completely key, and we are not in a good state. We understand that. So how to do it? So we talked about from a variety of perspectives. Key words included reciprocity, accountability, community building, humility, and for example, when people ask me, "Oh, you're in this Hoffman Center, so Andre Hoffman, who's on TV all the time, what kind of guy is he?" And so, what I would typically, the first word that comes to usually that I would say is humility, right? I mean, he's surrounded by people interested in interacting with him, but he has remained very, very humble. Yeah, and that's great, and I think that's an important aspect here. And so to give, so there are also academic studies that show that you can actually build trust in a very concrete way. I'll talk about briefly a science study by Ondrilla Dube from University of Chicago and others, where basically what they did, they went to the worst case of context where it's hardest to build trust, in Sierra Leone after a bloody civil war, and they went to 100 villages. 50 of them, they did some village council around a fire and they talked through things, and the other 50, they did something completely different. And they found that this kind of non-hierarchical, open, community-building discussion would massively increase trust between former foes and enemies. So this kind of worked really, really well. And you can document that in a RCT method like pharma industry would use to test drugs. So that's really important, and it's important, especially in hard cases, that we follow these principles. So Severin talked about vaccines before, and vaccines and climate change, what they have in common is they have externalities where my actions, I cannot just say, I don't care about climate change, I don't care about vaccines, because my actions will affect others. While if I don't care about taking a shower and I stay at home, well, this won't affect others, right? As long as I don't go out. So you see the point. And so building trust in these kind of settings is particularly hard. And so what can academia do? Well, academia, the key words that we came up with is that we want to be more strategic in general, and we want to be more timely. And in terms of timely, Beatrice, as president of our lobby CPR, can tell you more maybe afterwards. CPR and CPR CEO Tessa, who's here, CPR is particularly good at that with the rapid response papers or some ebooks. So we edited together an ebook on the consequences of Ukraine war, for example. So these kind of things, and this thing we created, very rapidly, within months after it broke out. And so I think we should kind of be quicker, but without being superficial, and we need to be kind of strategic. Other things we've noted was that in general, we are in good shape. So our specialists on trust have shown that academia has the best trust potential of all the different institutions, that people around the world, they trust more in academia than in a government, for example. So we are in good shape, but we need to be much better at communicating. So on that note, I'll stop.
Thank you very much, Dominic. Thank you also for the advertisement that you made in passing. We now come to the last group, which is civil society, and I think Joanna Popp, our managing director, who also deserves ex-ante applause because she did the lion's share in organizing this event. Together with intent, yes. Who do we applaud? General. And yes, Dominic already mentioned Tessa Oggen is the CEO of CEPR. And before I forget, I also want to recognize, thank you very much, Rosalie Hoffmann, who is here with us. And, we definitely wouldn't be here without you.
Thank you. So I'm reporting back from the CSO table, which was aptly moderated by Gilles Carbonnier, who had to step out. And there were many keywords that were already mentioned. So I'll just focus on the relative comparative advantage of CSOs as they came out from the discussions, and I'll focus on 3 points. their function, their role, and possibly 2 low-hanging fruits that they could fill in. First of all, civil society organizations have the immense added value of being able to facilitate one-to-one interactions. They can create personal spaces, they can build community. That makes them representative. Secondly, they can connect dots that are relevant to the different contexts. They can create personalized interactions. They can build communities in ways that are relevant to those who feel them on the ground, which also brings us to the third point. They can translate the SDGs, the big picture agendas, to the audiences that they serve. And in this way, they can help engage populations in ways that are meaningful for building trust, including trust with government, trust with multilateral organizations. Fourthly, civil society organizations can act as trusted, neutral intermediaries, particularly in situations of post-conflict, where we have a need for neutral intermediaries, for trusted spaces, for frank communication that is so well served by an independent entity. Next, and very interestingly so, civil society organizations can also communicate in credible ways consumer concerns, and in this way mediate between business and government to facilitate relevant regulation. There is, however, a risk that of civil society organizations being instrumentalized, which has also came up in our discussion. These would be the functions. I would now emphasize the role that civil society organizations can play to rebuild trust. First and foremost, they're legitimate because they are representative, because they are living organic entities that are built in the different contexts. They have the power of communicating messages in ways that are pertinent, but also trusted by the individuals that form them. Secondly, they can connect local societies and physical meeting points more so than local governments or national governments could do. A word we've heard about before as well, accountability. They can increase accountability by coagulating NGO networks that can voice concerns from the ground up. What they can also fill as a role is the function of foresight through the credibility that they provide and through the continuity of engagement. Let's not forget governments are elected, CSOs are here to stay. And finally, the 2 untapped resources that came up in our discussions. What can CSOs do that other stakeholders maybe cannot? They can use religion to build community and trust, and also organize sports with that effect. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, thank you for bringing in religion and sports. Clearly something that have a lot of people can organize around. And you know, one of my first evenings, a bit surprisingly here at Davos, was about spirituality and the question how this relates to and how we can take power and force from spirituality. If we look just at, you know, as we have progressed across these tables, in one way one could think that it's easier for civil society organizations, it's easier for academia, at least they sound more optimistic than the governments and multilaterals. And with business, probably it's a little bit, mixed, the feeling. I mean, what is, I have, you know, a few of the keywords that I have written down here. Starting point of broken trust, systemic trust, where silence and fear are dominant factors, is of course a bad starting point. A starting point of conflict is not a great starting point either. As possible solutions, what is named coalitions, collective action, not everybody on their own, but sticking out their head on their own, but together. And for that, creating safe spaces. there is one example of, and this is actually one recipe for institution building. Think about the Bretton Woods institutions and how they came about during the war. The war was still ongoing. Second World War was ongoing, but leaders of a coalition of willing decided that this would have to somehow be different when the war stops from how it was before. And they put together, they used a device which the Catholic Church also uses. It's called a conclave, Put everybody in a room, throw away the key, and tell them you won't come out before, before you have found an agreement, white smoke. Safe space, food can go in, but that's all, right? A decision. I mean, safe spaces, starting with these kind of coalitions of willing, thinking about the after war, about the order that could, it will be a different order after. It will not be the one that we had before. It may be variable geometries across coalitions of willings with very different topics. Naoko, thank you for reminding us. We are not here just to keep international institutions because they create great employment and wonderful meetings, right? Everybody here is definitely a benefit from international meetings. That's not the reason why we want to get together. It is because these international institutions actually create solutions that are otherwise hard to find. Financing the global commons, looking after and making sure that our global temperature doesn't increase too much and that we save and preserve what is left of nature and restore what we have already destroyed. All of those things will not be done without some collaboration. And that's why the trust topic will definitely remain with us, why we will have to look for mechanisms to rebuild, and we have to also look for mechanisms, I would suggest, that are bigger than civil society organizations only, that also work across the different actors and the different spaces that we have here represented and discussed. Clearly, That's all. Thank you so much. There is a QR code. There's a QR code. If you want to give us some feedback, that would be wonderful. Thank you. From Intent. And am I forgetting anything else? Just to thank you all for coming and see you around.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you for coming first. I haven't seen you for a while.